Stoicism. Crates the Cynic is reputed to have been the teacher of Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, who, as we shall see, can be said to have taught the internalization of the Cynic virtues of continence and self-mastery, and to have applied the concept of indifference, apatheia, or patheia, not to society and the goal of an honorable life, but to the vicissitudes of fortune and the inescapabilities of aging, illness, and death. What recommended Stoicism to educated and patrician Romans later was its high ideal of a noble, self-mastered life, a life of courage and fortitude, a robust and manly life which could, with equal dispassion, bear the hardships of the military frontier abroad and the demands of duty at home. Zeno hailed from Citium on the island of Cyprus, where he was born in 334 BCE. He began adult life as a merchant, but after reading Xenophon's account of Socrates, he decided to study philosophy. It is said that while on a visit to Athens, he asked a bookseller for advice on whom to approach among the teachers of philosophy, and that at moment Crates passed by, so the bookseller pointed him out. Zeno acquired from Crates his dedication to the Cynic virtues of continence and simplicity, but his modesty prevented him from living with shamelessness in the preferred Cynic manner, hence his idea of internalizing the virtues, of being a semi-Cynic in private, as it were. In addition to modesty, he also had a strong sense of civic duty, which required that one perform one's responsibilities as a citizen rather than rejecting society altogether. His convictions in this respect are illustrated by the fact that when he was offered Athenian citizenship, he refused it in order to keep faith with his native Citium, where he had endowed the public baths and was held in great esteem. Crates was not Zeno's only teacher. He listened to teachers of the Megarian school of logic and the philosophers of the academy, and whereas Cynicism gave him inspiration for his ethical teaching, it was from these other influences that he developed views in logic and physics. He set up his own school in the painted colonnade, or stoa, of the Athenian agora, from which the name of the school derives. His pupil and then colleague Cleanthes, 330 to 230 BCE, succeeded him as head of the school when he died in 262 BCE. The logical and physical teachings of Stoicism were developed by Cleanthes and his own successor as the school's head, Chrysippus, 279 to 206 BCE. It is not known which of them is chiefly responsible for the doctrines of early Stoicism, but later Stoicism, as exemplified by Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, was almost exclusively devoted to the ethical question of how to live, though this aspect of Stoicism was present from the outset. In their physics, the Stoics were committed to the view that the signature of reality is the capacity to act or to be acted upon, and they therefore said that the only things that exist are physical bodies. Matter, therefore, is a fundamental principle, or arche, of the universe. But they pointed out that we also refer to many other things that are not bodies, for example, places, times, and imaginary objects, such as mythical beasts. These things do not exist, but subsist, that is, have a kind of courtesy semi-existence because they can be talked about. Unlike Plato, who held that universals really exist, albeit in a realm of being, accessible only to the intellect, they described these objects of reference as mental entities only, much as did the nominalists of later philosophy. The arche, matter, is indestructible and eternal, but there is another fundamental principle of the universe alongside matter, also indestructible and eternal. This is logos, reason. It pervades and organizes the universe, making it go through a cycle of changes, beginning with fire, passing through the formation of the elements, fire, air, water, and earth, the first two active and the latter two passive, thence on the emergence of the world as we know it, constituted by combinations of these elements, and thence back again to the universal fire, which begins the cycle over again in eternal recurrence. This logos, or logos, or reason, the Stoics also called fate and God, and it is a material thing, like the physical universe, which it orders through these endlessly repeating cycles. The Stoics held that the universe is a plenum of matter, meaning that there is no empty space. This raises the question of how things can be individuated told apart externally and how they can maintain themselves internally as individual things. The answer is that they are kept apart as different individuals and kept together internally, each as a single individual, by pneuma, or in the Greek, breath, which is a combination of fire and air. Pneuma penetrates all things, and because it comes in different grades, it is the cause of things having different properties. It is what gives plants and animals their respective kinds of life, and it is what gives reason to humans. It is unclear whether this view committed the Stoics to thinking that because pneuma is physical stuff, its sole role as the rational part of a human being cannot survive a bodily dissolution at death. Chrysippus said that the pneuma of the wise would survive the death of their associated bodies until the next fiery conflagration, perhaps because the pneuma of the wise has greater self-integrating power than that of the unwise, but the view smacks of compromise. Logic was a broad topic for the Stoics, including not just reasoning and its science, but also epistemology and philosophical grammar. Their contributions to logic, strictly so-called, were significant. Unlike Aristotle's logic of terms, they explored the inferential relations between whole propositions and identified 3 basic rules of inference. Actually, they thought there were 5, but 3 of them are the same rule written in 3 different ways, which are familiar and central in today's propositional calculus. You might want to look up propositional calculus if you are interested in that. An interesting feature of their logic is that it is committed to strict bivalence. That is, the principle that there are 2 and only 2 truth values, namely true and false, and that every assertion must be one or the other. Aristotle had wrestled with the question whether this must be so by contemplating a proposition about the future. Quote, "There will be a sea battle tomorrow. This is now definitely either true or false. If it is either, there must now be a fact about the future. But the future does not exist, so how can there be a fact about it?" Aristotle therefore decided that the proposition is neither true or false. Bivalence does not, he said, apply to future tense propositions about contingent matters. Chrysippus, however, thought that all statements, even future tensed ones, must be definitely either true or false, and this therefore committed him to strict determinism. If, quote, "there will be a sea battle tomorrow," is now either true or false, it is now already settled that there will or will not be a sea battle tomorrow. In asserting the Stoic metaphysical principle that Logos, as fate, derives the universe through its repeating cycles of history, he is to be taken quite literally. This view brought the Stoics into conflict with the Academy, Plato's school, which had by this time been converted to skepticism, which we will talk about next. The Stoics argued that the criterion of a belief's truth is whether or not the experience that gives rise to it is caused in one's mind by the thing itself, as they put it. Truth consists in the phantasia kataleptike, or cognitive impression, being stamped and impressed on one's mind in accordance with the very thing itself, and is such that it could not arise from what is not. The skeptics pointed out that no impression arising from something true is such that an impression arising from something false could not be just like it. This is a point that has made skeptical arguments a central concern in epistemology throughout its history. The Stoics did not think that merely having an impression amounted to knowledge just by itself, nor did they think that having an impression and assenting to it or believing it is enough. The impression has to be supported by something further, something that nails it down, as Plato has said. What is that something further? Of course, this is the $64,000 question that all epistemology has tried to answer. The answers have included watertight justification of some kind, conformity with other known truths, a logical relationship to foundational or self-evident or basic propositions. The candidates have been numerous. Zeno of Citium had himself given the following illustration. Hold out your hand. That is perceiving. Fold the fingers back. That is believing. Clench your fist. That is comprehending. Grasp your fist very tightly and securely in your other fist so that it is supported. That is knowing. Like these other suggestions, this indicates the form of that a definition of knowledge should be like, but not the substance. It was, however, the ethics of Stoicism that made it so influential for so long, especially in the Roman world. The fundamental Stoic idea in ethics is that happiness, which they agreed is the end or goal, or telos, of life, consists in living in accordance with nature. What is in accordance with nature is what is good. The good is what benefits us in all circumstances, unlike things which are only good in some circumstances and not in others. For example, wealth. Things that are sometimes good and sometimes bad, the Stoics call it indifference. The things that are always good are the virtues of prudence, courage, moderation, and justice, the four cardinal virtues of Aristotle. Given that wealth can sometimes be good, though it is not an unqualified good like prudence, we need to distinguish between what is good as such and what can sometimes have value, or axia in Greek. Things which have value, or axia, can be preferred over their opposites. Wealth, health, and honor can be preferred to poverty, illness and dishonor, because they are usually of advantage to us or appropriate for us. And as such, we have a natural tendency to seek them. But if they interfere with the realization of what is wholly and unqualifiedly good, they are, of course, not to be preferred to it. Living well consists in rationally choosing those things that are good, and those things that are appropriate when consistent with things that are good, and the choices will be governed by seeking to conform to nature. It may well be that we do not succeed in achieving certain of the indifference which we rationally and appropriately pursue, such as wealth, but if we have what is good, courage, prudence, moderation, we will still be happy. An important aspect of this is the idea that what lies within our own control, for example our appetites, desires, and fears, we should seek to master. But as to what lies beyond our control, those things which we can do nothing about, such as aging or suffering because of an illness or earthquake, we must face them with courage. The difference is between action and passion. Action is what we do. Passion is what we undergo or suffer as recipients without a choice. To bear the passions, pathe, courageously, means not letting them master us. We must be apathetic with regard to them. That is the original meaning of this term. The ancients also thought that emotions we now regard as active ones, such as love and anger, and to which we give the name of passions, were indeed truly so in the sense of their being inflicted on us as passive recipients of them. The passion of erotic desire, lust, was thought to be an infliction, even a punishment from the gods. Excessive versions of the passions are disobedient to reason, and it is necessary to school oneself to be ready for them, so that one can be, well, stoical about them. Unlike the more technical and difficult philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, and unlike the practically unlivable, if entertaining example provided by the Cynics, Stoicism was immediately applauded by the Athenian public. A statue was raised to Zeno, and its inscription included the words of Zeno of Citium, was a man of worth, exhorting the youth who were his pupils to virtue and temperance, affording by his own conduct a pattern in perfect accord with his teachings. It was a popular philosophy, and it received widespread recognition, including among its admirers the king of Macedon, Antigonus II Gonatas, who as a young man had attended Zeno's lectures in Athens, and who wished Zeno to come to Macedon to tutor his son. Cleomenes III of Sparta introduced reforms in line with Stoic teaching, and by the 1st century BCE it had become a significant part of patrician education in Rome. Octavian, who became the Emperor Augustus, had the Stoic Athenodorus Calvus as his tutor when he was young. In the first 2 centuries CE, the three leading Stoics were Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, who wrote in Greek, and Seneca, who wrote in Latin. Whereas Epictetus thought and Seneca published, Aurelius did neither. His statement of a Stoic outlook in his To Himself, now known as the Meditations, was a private diary written while he was with his army on the troubled and dangerous Danube frontier in the years 170 to 80 CE. The desire for privacy was his reason for writing in Greek. The humanity and Stoic dedication to service, exemplified in his book, have been admired ever since. Epictetus was born a slave in Phrygia His name is, in effect, a word which means bought or owned. He was taken to Rome in early life, where his owner, himself a former slave who had served the Emperor Nero, allowed him to study philosophy with the Stoic Musonius Rufus. After he had gained his freedom, Epictetus set up as a teacher. In 93 CE, the Emperor Domitian prescribed philosophy in Rome and banished the philosophers, whereupon Epictetus moved to Nicopolis in Greece and established a school. He wrote nothing himself, but his teachings have been preserved in the Discourses, and for a more popular readership, in the Enchiridion, or Handbook, by his pupil Arrian. Self-knowledge and self-mastery are the key ideas in Epictetus. He argued that the distinction between what is within our power and what lies outside our power shows where the good is to be found, namely within ourselves. Our use of reason and our freedom to choose allow us to evaluate the experiences we have and to ask ourselves, can I do something about this? If the answer is yes, then act. If the answer is no, then say, it is nothing to me. This is the apatheia connoted in the idea of bearing with or being stoical about the unavoidable or inevitable. Everything turns on our attitudes, which lie under our own control, guided by reason. Acceptance of inevitables is freedom. It is the price paid for a quiet mind. There is something of fatalism in Epictetus' teaching. Ask not that events should happen as you will, but let your will be that events should happen as they do, and you shall be at peace. Behave in life as you would at a banquet. A dish is handed around and comes to you. Put out your hand and take politely. It passes you. Do not stop it. It has not reached you. Do not be impatient to get it, but wait until your turn comes. Remember that foul words and blows are no outrage in themselves. It is your judgment that they are so that makes them so. When anyone makes you angry, it is your own thought that has angered you. Therefore, make sure not to let your impressions carry you away. Seneca the Younger was born in Spain in 4 BCE and became a senator and advisor to the Emperor Nero in Rome. His efforts to mitigate the increasingly cruelty of Nero's rule failed, so he tried to retire, but the emperor refused to let him go. Eventually, he was implicated in the Pisonian plot to assassinate Nero, and his punishment was an order to commit suicide, which he did. This occurred in 65 CE. The historian Tacitus gives a graphic account of the occasion. Because of his age and condition, Seneca was unable to bleed to death effectively after cutting open several veins. The blood flowed too thinly and weakly, and so he took poison as well, eventually immersing himself in a hot bath to speed the blood loss. Tacitus says that he was suffocated by the steam. Seneca's works include essays, moral letters, dialogues, and tragedies, almost all published in his lifetime, and they had a wide readership and great popularity. He knew the thought of his Stoic predecessors well, and applied it eclectically to the business of living a good, fortuitous, and reason-governed life. No doubt troubles will come, but they are not a present fact, and might not even happen after all. Why run to meet them? More things make us afraid than do us harm. Do not be unhappy before the crisis comes. Some things torment us more than they ought. Some torment us before they even happen. Some torment us which should not torment us at all. We exaggerate or imagine or anticipate sorrow unnecessarily, he says. The theme is the central Stoic one, that it is our own attitudes and beliefs that make life good or bad. Hamlet was epitomizing Stoicism in his remark that, quote, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, end quote. There is nothing theoretical about the adjurations of the Stoics, for whom philosophy was a practical matter, aimed at making a real difference to the felt quality of life. Understanding oneself and how things are in the world is liberating, they argued, precisely because it puts the key to happiness in our own hands. We can choose to be indifferent to what we cannot influence, while at the same time rationally governing our own feelings. It was a commentator on Stoicism, the great Cicero, who best found a way of summing up their ethical outlook. Quote, to learn to philosophize, he wrote, is to learn how to die, meaning that a right understanding of death frees one from the fear of it, so that one can live with greater courage and autonomy. If you are not afraid of death, You are ultimately and completely free because you always have an escape from the intolerable, freedom from the oppression of anxiety and fear, and from desiring what one cannot oneself achieve or gain is happiness itself. The idea that happiness is the aim is, as we shall see, shared by all in the ethical debate from Aristotle onwards. Ideas about how to achieve it have much in common too. For in Aristotle, Epicurus, and the Stoics, reason is the liberator. The differences between them on this particular point lie chiefly in what aspect of reason's application they emphasize.